Good evening. I confess I don't think I properly paid attention to Teresa's instructions for this evening's event, and what I was supposed to do in this 15 minutes is to give you a kind of overview of my practice and then go down and look specifically at the work downstairs. I didn't hear that. So what I'm going to do is I have I made a presentation at the Royal Geographical Society for the conference that was associated with this exhibition, which is called Crossing Boundaries, in June. What I'm going to try to do is to just talk in a much freer and much less kind of conference papery way about some of the work that I've made and how mapping comes to be an interesting thing or an idea for me to explore in terms of my work. And I called my original conference paper Inappropriate Use, which is a phrase that came from an essay by I think he's a Marxist economist geographer called David Harvey, who was talking about the ways that geographers need to be much more responsible in terms of thinking about how their work is constructed and the kinds of uses that their practice is involved in. Thinking in terms, he was talking principally from the point of view that geographical practices are implicated in the relations of power and in injustice across the world. And I chose Inappropriate Use because I think it spoke to me about the way in which I engage with mapping or cartographic practices. I think I try to use them inappropriately, I suppose in a way to make us think a bit differently about why we trust certain kinds of documents and representational practices. So this is the first image, which was Teresa and Christine asked me to think of an idea for a piece to do on the wall in the Iniva lobby downstairs. And I spent all the money on the vitrines, which are in the gallery, so there wasn't any money to make this. It's a vinyl wall work, and it's a corner of a map. But it doesn't really quite work. The longitude and latitude, if you look, the numbers are slightly peculiar. The scale goes from 29 to 73 to 4. And the legend is sort of in the wrong place as well, because you think about how the map might expand outwards, they're not quite in the corner of the room. And the features on the map are opinions rather than facts. But it somehow looks like it might initially be quite plausible, and which I think is to do with what I call the kind of rhetoric of authority, which is the kind of the apparatus that we use to present certain kinds of documents that make them look much more authoritative and therefore plausible. So anyway, that's just another close-up of that. I don't really have anything else to say about it, really. Now, at the time that I was writing this paper, I was reading a book by Anne McClintock called Imperial Leather, Race, Gender and Sexuality in the Colonial Contest, which I recommend heartily to everybody, because it's a very fantastic read. And one of the things that she talks about in this book is to do with the construction and representation of empire, and to do with the way in which images of the world, principally from popular literature and advertising, constructed the idea of empire for a British audience, at the same time producing, interestingly, the idea of the Victorian woman. And there are a bunch of illustrations in the book, which I think, well, it's a great book. And this is one of the images that was in there. It's from a book, the title of the book is down there, it's very long, I won't read it. But what it is it's a representation of the globe. At the top of the globe is the Crystal Palace, which was built specially for the Great Exhibition of 1851, and is now in Crystal Palace. And this is all of the world going to see the Great Exhibition. And I was very interested in the way in which it kind of constructs an idea of what the world is, what's important in the world, what the kinds of, for example, the ways in which the pyramids are peripheralized, the pagodas at the bottom are peripheralized, the way that the world just appears as a kind of terra nullius, apart from this massive, enormous, very authoritative looking crystal palace at the top. And I think the phrase I became interested in was to do with the way it kind of constructs an object of knowledge. So it constructs the world as an object of knowledge through this image. The other image, which I brought from the same book, is an advert for Bovril that was published in the British press sometime, I think, during the Boer War. And it's a very carefully configured map of a bit of South Africa. I think it's in Kimberley and Bloemfontein. And I don't know if you can read it, but I did write it down, so I'll just very quickly read what the bottom of it says, in case you can't. Careful examination of this map will show that the route followed by Lord Roberts in his historical march to Kimberley and Bloemfontein has made an indelible imprint of the word Bovril on the face of the Orange Free State. This extraordinary coincidence is one more proof of the universality of Bovril, which has already figured so conspicuously throughout the South African campaign. Whether for the soldier on the battlefield, the patient in the sick room, the cook in the kitchen, or for those as yet in full health and strength at home, Bovril is liquid life. And it's an interesting image for a number of reasons. Obviously, there's already this map. Where does that original map come from? Who built it and for what purposes? And now that map has been reconfigured to, in very much the way, it kind of totally parallels the kind of processes of imperialism. You know, the military advance then permits, you know, economic advancement to occur thereafter. And land that has histories and peoples and bodies of people who have died for this war, in this war, are now being subsumed by this branding of that territory as by Bovril. So anyway, that's the end of my plug for Anne McClintock.